Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lisa. I'm an Australian living in Amsterdam and I have lived here for just over 3 years now. This video is the final part of my Buying a Home in the Netherlands series where I talk about basically whether or not you should do it. Buying a home is not the right decision for everyone, and how do you figure out if it is the right decision for you? The first important question that I think you should be asking is, what is your financial situation, both in the long term but also in the short term? What I mean by that is whether or not, in addition to the monthly mortgage repayments that you have to make, are you going to also be able to afford the additional upfront fees and costs associated with buying a home? For instance, there are legal fees, there's furnishing your home, you have upkeep and maintenance costs, there's land tax fees, there's strata costs. I took a look at our finance tracker in preparation for this video and I calculated that we spent about 18,000 euros in upfront costs for things like the notary fees, structural inspection report, valuation or appraisal report, the makelaar, the translation fees, so on and so forth. I don't know about you, but 18,000 euros is a lot of money for me, and that's not something that everyone just has lying around in their bank account. Also, the 18,000 euros doesn't include the additional money that we ended up spending on the bathroom renovation and the kitchen renovation, and also doesn't include the cost of furnishing this home, because in our last apartment it was actually a furnished apartment, so we moved here without any of our own furniture. Even though we tried to buy secondhand as much as possible, it still ended up costing us quite a bit of money. And then of course, in addition to all those things I mentioned, you might also have some unexpected costs that come up. When you're a renter and something breaks down, you can just ask your landlord to pay for that, to get it fixed. But when you're a homeowner, you're the one who has to pay for those things. And another example of an unexpected cost could be that interest rates might increase, and therefore that will also increase your mortgage repayment fees as well. I do think the best case scenario is that you have a healthy, reliable stream of income coming in, and also that you have a healthy amount of savings in your bank account for those unexpected and expected costs that home ownership entails. On that note, I think the second question you should ask yourself is whether or not you are ready for the responsibilities that home ownership will bring. As I said earlier, if something breaks down in your home, you are the one who has to take responsibility in fixing it. You are the one who has to pay for it, no matter how big the cost is. And from personal experience, the task of improving your home actually never really comes to an end. I find that there is always something to fix, there is always something to work on, there is always something to add, to adjust. And that takes a lot of time out of my life and a lot of energy, not to mention money as well, because all these adjustments and fixing, it costs money. I don't remember caring that much when I was just a tenant. I think for most people that's expected. We tend to care for things a little bit more when they are our own things compared to if they belong to others. I definitely get more upset if something gets damaged or breaks down in my own home compared to if I was living in a rental. A lot of people think that owning a home gives you more freedom, and to some degree that's true, because you have more control of your environment. You're allowed to decorate it the way that you want to. You can furnish it the way that you want to. If something is broken, you can go and take charge and fix it without having to wait for the landlord to agree to fix it, to agree to pay for it. But on the other hand, I do think it comes with less freedom as well, because personally, I spent less time fixing things and improving things in the home when I was living in a rental, and I would spend that time and energy and money on actually doing fun things like hobbies. If you're unhappy with your home or your neighbors, it's much more difficult to move homes and to leave that situation when you are an owner compared to if you are a renter. A lot of people understand that renting usually costs more money in the long term compared to buying, but they are happy to pay that extra money for the peace of mind and for that kind of freedom that I just talked about. Not everyone is ready to take on, I guess, that responsibility of being a homeowner. The third really important question that I think you should ask is, how long are you actually planning to be in the Netherlands? Buying a home in the Netherlands as an expat or an international, it really only makes sense, in my opinion, if you're going to be here for a long period of time, at least 3 years, I think. And even better if you can stay here for longer than that. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of upfront costs associated with buying a home, and you're not really going to break even on those costs unless you have actually lived in the home for a longer period of time. No one can predict the future, and you may have the intention of staying here long term, but lots of things can change along the way. Maybe for whatever reason you have to go back to your home country earlier than you expected. Maybe you came here for work and your work situation changes. Maybe you came here for a relationship and the relationship changes. Or maybe it's as simple as, you really loved living here last year, but then this year you realize, far out, I really hate living here and I don't want to live here anymore. I know that in our particular case, Gustavo and I plan to come here for 2 to 3 years maximum. But now it has been over 3 years and Gustavo and I are still here, and that kind of tells you a lot about how people's minds can change over time in ways that you don't predict. I just bring it up because I think it's important to take those possibilities into consideration, but to also think about what your long-term plan is and have different contingency plans for all the different scenarios that might take place. Furthermore, I think it's also important to mention, if you are planning to buy a home for property investment purposes or to rent it out later on down the line, it's important to understand the local laws surrounding these two situations. At the time of recording this video, it is actually becoming more and more difficult to rent out your home in a way that benefits the landlord. For instance, there's a big push to phase out the temporary 2-year rental contracts that many landlords use, which means that there is a lot of encouragement in favor of indefinite contracts, which are more favorable for tenants. Of course, this is an amazing thing. I think tenants should all have those kind of rights. But as a landlord, it's not so great because perhaps you want to rent it out for a limited period of time, and maybe you don't want to be in a situation where it's difficult to vacate your property and do what you want with it. Also, tax-wise, there's not really many incentives to keep the property as an investment property either. I think you should also keep that in mind if you buy a place and you suddenly have to leave for whatever reason. Are you going to hold on to the property, and is that financially the smartest thing to do? Or are you prepared to sell it but then not have already broken even with the upfront costs that you had to pay in the beginning? The fourth point that I think you should consider is something that applies, I think, worldwide, not just in the Netherlands, and that is buying a home usually means that you have to compromise on something. That again totally depends on your personal financial situation. Maybe you are super cashed up and you don't have to compromise on anything. Unfortunately, for most people, that's not really feasible. And usually, as someone who has been both a homeowner in Sydney and now in Amsterdam, it usually means that you have to compromise on something when you are buying compared to if you are renting. So for example, I think most people can agree it is financially more sustainable for most people to rent a very nice, modern, spacious apartment in a desirable location compared to buying that place. So in this case, your quality of life might arguably be better if you are renting compared to if you are buying. For a lot of people, the biggest compromise that is associated with buying a home is that you have to move further away from where you would ideally like to live. For instance, buying a place in Amsterdam is really expensive, and as a result, people compromise by buying a place in Holland or Utrecht or somewhere nearby. Alternatively, like us, for instance, we wanted to stay in Amsterdam, and the thing we compromised on was space. We were willing to live in a smaller place and stay in Amsterdam, knowing that for the same price that we paid, we probably could get a place that's double the size in a different city. Every now and then I get some comments on my YouTube channel telling me what an idiot I am for buying a place in Amsterdam or for living in a shoebox in Amsterdam, but I just want to say that that's the compromise I was willing to make. I didn't want to leave Amsterdam, and so I'm happy to live in a smaller place. You need to think about whether you are willing to make those kinds of compromises and whether that's actually going to be a deal breaker or not. And if you are in a situation where you love love the apartment that you're renting, you can't afford to buy a place that comes anywhere close to where you're living in now, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to continue renting in that place if that makes you happy. The fifth important thing to note is you won't be able to fully participate in strata meetings or VVE meetings if you are a non-Dutch speaker. So as I mentioned in a previous video, every apartment block has a Dutch Owners Association, which is abbreviated in Dutch to VVE. For legal reasons, VVE meetings are always held in Dutch. So if you don't speak Dutch, then you are not going to be able to fully participate in those discussions. Unfortunately, both Gustavo and I, we are not able to participate in those discussions because we do not speak Dutch. And therefore, in doing so, we forfeit our right to make decisions or make contributions towards these discussions as homeowners. This is obviously not our preference. We would love to be more involved. We would love to have a say in what happens to the building. There are, of course, other ways to stay up to date with what's going on. For instance, you can translate the documents that you receive from the VVE meetings. We also try to chat with our Dutch neighbors who do participate in those meetings to try to get an understanding of what happened and what's going on. Our building also has a WhatsApp group chat, which is really, really handy. And that's a really good way of asking questions that we want to ask about the building and getting all the necessary updates from the VVE meetings. But of course, it doesn't replace actually being there yourself. So please keep that in mind. If that's something that's really important to you, then take that into consideration before you go ahead and buy a home. So I did also mention that I would quickly go through some things that we would have done differently if we were to go through the home buying process all over again. First thing that I would potentially change or do differently is to do with our makelaar. Don't get me wrong, I really liked our makelaar. She was really nice. For some reason though, I didn't put as much effort into finding the right makelaar as I did with our mortgage broker. So I mentioned in the first video, I was so happy with the mortgage broker that we chose. We went with OHAL. They explained everything so clearly. It was clear from all the conversations that we had. They had a lot of experience working with internationals and expats, and they knew how to communicate the process in a way that made sense to us. And that's not something that we necessarily had with our makelaar. I got the feeling that she didn't have as much experience working with internationals. I did mention that I was disappointed in the amount of personal input that we got from her when it came to the locations of the places that we were inspecting. If I had to do something differently, I would have shopped around a little bit more for the right makelaar and paid more attention to whether or not they were a good personal fit. The other thing I thought a lot about is whether or not we would have started the home buying process a little bit earlier than we did. We rented here for 2 years before deciding to buy a home. From a purely financial perspective, it would have been much better if we had bought a home a little bit earlier. But at the same time, I have mixed emotions because I really loved the apartment that we lived in. And as I said, our initial plan was to stay here for 2 years and then go back to Australia. So I guess this is kind of hindsight bias. Now that I know that we are deciding to stay here for longer, it would have been nice to have bought a place earlier. Maybe the main takeaway is as soon as you know that you are planning to stay here longer, that's when you should maybe seriously start considering the option of buying if that suits your circumstances. The third thing that I would have done a little bit differently is to try and buy a home that required less renovation than our current place did. Our criteria was to find a place that didn't require a head-to-toe renovation, and that is certainly the case. So in our home, the floorboards were already done and everything was in relatively okay condition. But upon moving in, we realized that the bathroom actually needed to be renovated, the kitchen was outdated and also needed a touch-up, and all those things ended up costing us a little bit more money than we had originally budgeted for. A lot of people say that it doesn't matter how a place looks because you can change everything yourself, but what they don't realize is how mentally and financially and physically taxing it is to go through a renovation. If I could do this all over again, I think I would have preferred to buy a place that required even less renovation than our current place did and just spend more money up front. It's been about 1.5 years since we first bought this place and moved in. I have had times where I actually wish we didn't buy this place, especially when we were renovating and when we had to paint this place ourselves. It was a lot of hard work. I really missed the comfort and the ease that comes with renting an apartment where you don't have any responsibilities. But now that all those things are over, now that we've finished the renovation and we've done all the major repairs that we need to in this apartment, I'm really happy that we bought our own place. I feel that we did gain a lot more control and freedom in our life. I love that we don't have to answer to a landlord. I love that if something is broken, we can just go ahead and fix it ourselves and be proactive and take initiative. I love that I'm no longer in a situation where our lease might come to an end and we have to frantically find another place. I love the stability that home ownership brings. And given that our plan is to stay in Amsterdam for a few more years, I feel that this is, financially speaking, the better decision than continuing to rent an apartment. Kind of a roller coaster, I suppose. In the beginning, I kind of hated it, and now I've come to a much more balanced feeling of contentment and happiness. That is kind of my honest experience. I hope you enjoyed this video and that the questions I discussed are helpful to you and help you decide whether or not buying a home in the Netherlands is the right decision for you. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up before you head out the door, and also hit the subscribe button down below as well, because I make many videos like these and more. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!